you doing, babe?
You know what?
What?
Pretty good, actually. I just said I was telling you how productive I've been this morning.
We were
Like,
talking about how much you can do in an amount of time if you have deadlines.
yeah, if I only have 3 hours to do something, it is amazing what I can do. And then most of the time, I have like, in our job, we don't have like a ton of deadlines, right? It's like, okay, here are the things we have to get done this week. And then I don't get anything done.
Nothing. What's wrong with us? I mean, I'll do it
I
like
think that's humans.
last minute, you know.
Yeah,
I
me
think it
too.
is it's
We've
very
always,
human. But how good does it feel when you get so much done?
it's amazing.
Like, do you feel like the
Yes.
most productive person in the
I
world?
feel like the most powerful lady in the whole world.
Wow.
Yes. Oh,
And
wait.
hydrated too.
And I've been, can you hear that?
Yes.
Just my dog really
You
wants to make a
try
little spot
try.
there. If you watch us
Oh,
on YouTube, you can see
okay.
Big Murphy would like to have a little home for himself. Okay. I don't know. I don't know how to put this in. Speaking of my love of animals.
No. I don't think I don't think it works like that. Okay, so
Okay.
let's just go into it. Like one of the things we always talk about, okay, things intergenerational trauma and how to break patterns in your family, how to change things so that you're not passing it down, how to make changes in your own life to better your own, your own circumstances. Um, but one of the things that I don't think that we give enough credit to is the really great things that are passed down in our families.
Mm-hmm.
And it just puts a nice reframe on certain things.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we got
So,
this question, right? So
yeah.
we'll do Dear Em and Jen first because we got a really good Dear Em and Jen, which is Dear Em and Jen. I feel like I focus a lot on what I don't want to bring from my childhood into my family. How do I shift the focus on what I do want to bring? All the good things. Thank you. And I love that reframe.
Me too.
So we
So
asked
good.
listeners. We asked listeners. We asked everyone. So what are the good things from yours? And here are some really good answers. First of all, my favorite one, which is a full head of hair and a butt that don't quit. I respect that a lot. I also feel that I had a full head of hair and a butt that won't quit. Um, the drive to persevere, creativity, thoughtfulness, empathy, unconditional love, work ethic, humor, saying I love you, love for animals, showing affection, open-minded. I mean, my mom loves fiercely and I see myself doing it too. My parents always invite people over for dinner. I met so many different types of people, speaking through disagreements rather than yelling. I mean, so many beautiful things people had to say about their families.
And I think in this question, they're saying, how do I shift the focus on what I do want to bring? And that thing that I want to say, it doesn't have to be one or the other, right? It can be both, right? What are the things that I do want to bring? And then what are the things that I want to leave behind? And what matters is that it's a choice as opposed to a reaction, as opposed to something that's unconscious for you.
Mm.
And is really the goal here. And the thing, to be able to focus on like, here's some really good things in my family that I do want to bring with me allows you to actually make that choice to be able to bring that into your family dynamic or into your relationships, into your job. To make that piece of it more conscious too is just as important as making the other things conscious so that
Yeah.
you can make a choice.
So you're talking about making it conscious, right? You're talking about making a choice. What would you say? How does one do that, right? For so many of us, it just feels like an automatic reaction. How would you, what's some take home things people could do?
Something that I think, you know, is really important is that when you're with family or when you're reflecting on a, think about the things that really made you feel connected to them. What are the things, times in which you felt maybe safe? Think about your childhood growing up, um, and what was really important to you. I think that it's also makes it easier to think about in your friendships and romantic relationships, what are the things that are important to you? What makes you feel connected to other people? Um, it can be a good indicator of the ways in which you maybe felt connected to your family growing up.
Mm.
So I'll give you an example.
Yes.
Humor was something that was really utilized in my family dynamic ways in which I felt connected to my family. As we laughed a lot, we made jokes. And that is a way that I feel really connected in my friendships and in my romantic relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I want to think about like, what are the ways in which I felt safe or connected to my family growing up? And is that something that I value now in my current relationship? Sometimes it's just happening so automatically that we don't even realize that it's happening.
Yeah.
And so to make that conscious can also allow you to make choices in your relationships, who you want to be friends with, who you want to be close to, um, and also to create an environment or experiences where that connection is supported more.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so you got humor from your family. What else did you get? I want to hear yours.
Okay, humor. I think the one thing that I was thinking about, because I know I talk about this a lot, is, I was always told I was too sensitive. Um, there was a lot of, internal processing that I did because of that. I think I've often talked about the ways in which that maybe affected me by not being able to talk about my feelings. But one thing I think that it did that really did help me is I really learned how how to be by myself.
Mm,
I really learned how to process things internally. I really learned um, to become really comfortable on my own and being independent. So it's the same situation, but I can also look at the really great things that that gave me. And right now, the way in which I, um, you know, come back to myself is to be by myself.
mm,
And the thing that I really take out of that is that I have complete control over that. I get to make that decision. And when I am by myself, it really allows me to recenter. And I think that that's something I did get from growing up when, um, I was told go to your room or like process, like go upstairs and I kind of learned to handle things on my own. Um, so I think that, you can look at both sides of the coin.
yeah, truly.
What about you?
Um, uh, okay, so I think my dad is a fucking badass business guy, and I think I have a lot of perseverance and drive, like that, like, the importance of running a business, how to treat other people in that business. I think I really got a lot of that from my father. Um, yeah, I think also sometimes I'm really good at not engaging in something. My dad's sort of like, if there was like some family issue, my dad's like, nah, not touching that with a fucking 10-foot pole. And that was something that I sometimes would get resentful for, that I was like, oh, you were like this really disengaged person. And that I've also, now that I'm older, I'm like, sometimes that is an important skill to have
Yes.
for my dad. And then from my mom, I think that, my mom's an amazing therapist. I'm very lucky that I've listened to the show before. I didn't go to school to be a therapist, went to school to be a teacher. And I thought I wanted to be a teacher my whole life. And I do think that I teach in a lot of ways. I actually believe that I am a teacher. And but my mom was a therapist and my mom had a private practice. And that was something I was resentful towards when I was younger, because I felt like she wasn't home a lot. But now I can see the beautiful work she did for many, many people. And so I believe that I'm a very good therapist, also because of her. My mom is also really good at, she's really good at saying I'm sorry. That is something that not a lot of people can say about their parents. My
Yes,
mom
that is so
is
true.
my mom is great at saying I'm sorry. If I
Mm.
tell her somebody, she didn't hurt me or there was something, um uh, here's an example. Okay, I hosted Easter at my house, and I honestly, I used to love hosting shit, and now I fucking hate it because I have a kid. You can't keep the house clean. We cleaned the house the day before, and it was fucking shit show by the morning. And so hosting I used to love, and now I'm like, this shit sucks. And so I was feeling really overwhelmed. My mom got there, and I was like, this is just really hard to do with a kid. And my mom said, yeah, imagine doing it with two. And I looked at her and I said, that is a really shitty thing to say to someone who struggles with infertility and then has had multiple miscarriages. And she like looks at me and she was like, I did not mean that. And she was like, that's not what I was saying at all. And like, I'm sorry that happened. Right. So she's like really good at like immediately being like, okay, like, I'm sorry. And thank you for telling me. And I think that is a skill that I'm really good at, of like apologizing if I need to. And, you know, I'm
Absolutely.
human, so I need to.
We all
Um,
do.
yes, we all do, right? And so that's like a great skill to have. And the other thing my mom is really amazing at is she's very good at here's what's going on, I need a plan. So when I'm in crisis, in some type of crisis, I feel very, very powerless. And my mom was like, here's three things we can do right now. And that is really helpful to me. For some people, that feels invalidating, or it feels like they're not getting space or empathy. That's not it for me. I make a ton of fucking space for myself. I actually don't need anyone else to make it for me. But a lot of times I'm feeling so stuck and powerless. I need a plan. And my mom is really, really good at those. And so those are things you know what I mean? Like, even with my daughter now, I'll be like, okay, you feeling this? We can cry about it. And here's some other things that we can do as well, and giving her the option of either of those two things is really helpful. And I'm really good at saying I'm sorry to my kid, and I have to apologize all the time because I'm human.
I think that saying I'm sorry piece is so incredible and so important. And you know how your parents just in general, they're always like, "Oh, when you get older,
Yeah,
you'll understand."
maybe they're right. I don't
Yeah,
know. I
that's
Yes, I
what I
do
was
think
gonna
it.
say.
I mean, I think it's this hard thing, and my mom talks about it a lot. My parents are both 76. My mom had me older, and so it is an interesting thing that my mom sort of. I remember my mom saying to me at one point, she was just like, "You just don't realize that, like, when you're." I think this was in my 20s, and I was complaining about how I looked or something, right? Like, I was having some bad body issues. My mom was just like, "Oh, you have health. You have a 20-year-old body. You know, like, you just like." All these things you're feeling, like it gets so much harder.
Yeah.
And at the time I felt like resentful. And now I'm like, now I'm in my 30s and I'm like, my back hurts. Um, she
My
was
knees hurt.
right. And so I think there is this thing that, like, when you're younger, you really do think you know everything. There's a really good saying, right? That's like, you graduate high school thinking you know everything, and then you graduate college realizing you know nothing. And then I would probably say you go into your 30s and 40s and you realize you definitely fucking don't know anything. But you feel wiser and you feel more grounded in it.
And the thing that I think that makes me realize is that I'm going to keep understanding more
Yeah.
as I get older. You know, that I think the I think maybe the kind of struggle when you're in your 20s or even as a teenager is that you want so badly to be an adult and to be looked at as an adult. It's really important to you. And so you kind of create this fallacy in your head of like, I know everything, right? Like
Mm,
I understand this. You
yeah.
don't want to believe. And I think it feels safe to tell yourself that, oh, you've experienced everything and and you're going to be able to tackle everything. And the thing is, you can, but there is so much you still don't understand. Older, you realize that.
Yeah.
And I think that that's one thing that I've accepted too, is that I know that there are things that I don't know, and I
Yeah.
know that I'm going to continue to learn as I get older. God.
I will say I remember reading this article once that was about it was talking about mothers to new mothers. And it was talking about, someone said, people said no one's going to tell you how hard this is. And the article was saying, like, actually everyone does. Literally everyone's saying the same thing. Breastfeeding is fucking hard. Not getting sleep is hard. All this shit is hard as fuck. The thing is, we don't listen until it's us.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing, right? Until my body started to hurt, I didn't listen to my mom. Until I became a mother, I didn't listen. You know what I mean? Then all of a sudden you're like, oh, everyone is talking about this. But I wasn't listening before because I was like, I have to go see Avicii perform. And that was very important to me. Um,
Avicii.
that is what was significant to me in my
Right.
20s in
Right.
Amsterdam. I was like,
Right.
Avicii is performing in Utrecht, Amsterdam, and I have to go take drugs and be there. And that was the most important thing for me at the time,
Yes.
right? Like, and so the thing is, like, sometimes you aren't listening. And it's an interesting thing about, like, what if we like tried to hear some shit our parents said or our grandparents, right? Like, there was, after my grandmother passed, we found all of these letters that she kept, like, every letter she had written my grandfather when he was in the army. They were sexy. I mean, I was like, damn, like, they were really. And you don't these people were all people too, right? Like they were kids once and they were horny 20-year-olds and they were, 30-year-olds struggling and they were 40-year-olds processing midlife, right? Like all this stuff that like we're experiencing too. And a lot of times we're not asking. And I think that that is an important thing is do we listen to other people's stories, especially
Yeah.
people that are older than us that have had experience. I think sometimes we are so quick to be like, no one else can understand this. No one
Yeah.
else's experience is like me. And it's like simply not true. Just mathematically, it's not true.
Mathematically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
well, I think too, we go through a process of differentiating from our parents, and in that process, there is a lot of pushback of like, "Oh, I wanna be my own person, and I wanna be an individual separate from you."
Hmm.
Um, and I think that you get through that phase, you become your own person, you become an individual separate from your parents, but the process that has to change in that is that you start listening to them and you start trying to understand them in a different way. And I think that you get so used to, as you're kind of in this individuation period of your life, you get so used to distancing yourself from the things that they're saying, that is part of the process. Um, that's just a phase of life. And so to be able to also transition from that place to, okay, I've created this own identity for myself. I know who I am. I'm comfortable with who I am. And now I can really listen to what they're saying and see if it fits for me or not. And maybe it does, and maybe it doesn't.
But before it was just too goddamn triggering,
Yes.
right? Like before, like there was certain stuff my mom would say to me that I was just like, right? And like now I'm like, okay, she's like saying some stuff, and even if I don't fully agree with it, right? Like it's a different conversation. But I think that I mean, what we're talking about really is like the sense of differentiation. And
Yes.
also we went to see oh fuck, I'm gonna mess up her name, Nedra,
Yeah.
who is there, the Instagram famous therapist about
Yes.
boundaries. And she said this really funny thing at the beginning, right? She was talking about like social media culture of buzzwords, and she was talking about the term of toxic, and she was like, nobody's toxic to everyone, right? She was like, you even see news reports, some guy is like holding three girls hostage in the basement and the neighbor next door is like, that's crazy. I like that guy was super nice to me.
It
So
was
he
so
was
nice.
so he wasn't toxic to that one dude. And so if like
It's,
nobody is all bad or all good.
yeah.
And I've talked with so many clients about this before, especially when they lose a parent. Let's say they had a really, really rough relationship with this person, and then someone else, let's say it was a student or a neighbor, comes in and it's like, oh, your mom was just the best. She made me feel heard. And there's so many people who are like, what the fuck? I didn't feel that from my mom. I didn't feel heard by them. And that's such a difficult, complex thing to process through. Sometimes our parents were different people to different people.
And it's, I think, the most painful when that it's such a significant relationship in your life. And I think sometimes it's easier to believe that, okay, they were like this towards me, they must be like this towards everyone. And to hear that they weren't, um, can be really, really painful.
Yeah.
And um, so, it's just it's such an interesting thing to think about in the midst of what we talk about, because we talk a lot about, how do you create boundaries with your family? How do you not take on the things that you don't want to take on from your childhood? How do you work through that? And so to be able to look at too, like what did this give to me? And sometimes even the things that um the pain points in your relationship with your family also can give something to you. Um, and so it doesn't negate the fact that it's a pain point. And I think once again, this goes back to this idea of it has to be one or the other. But I think that something you can have something difficult in your relationship, and it also can give something to you. Like for example, my husband's dad was very strict, really hard on them. Which of course caused, some trouble in their relationships. But one thing it did give to every single one of them, they are hard workers. Every single one of them, really, really hard workers. Um, And so I think that it's just something to think about. And I always want to stay away from the idea, the like toxic positivity
Yeah.
idea. Well, like silver lining of everything, like you get something great out of everything you go
Yeah.
through. Like, no, that can still be painful. It can still be painful and you can still get something out of it too.
Mm-hmm. It's funny, I'm thinking about my grandmother. My grandmother was so good at making people feel welcome. So like my Mimi was like so good about being like hosting and doing all that stuff. And I like totally have that too because I loved
Yes.
that about her. There was a lot of shit I didn't love about her. The
Yeah.
casual racism of being born in the 1920s, right? Like there was a lot of shit that I was like, Jesus fucking Christ. Like, but there was like this small, beautiful things of making people feel loved and welcomed, including other people, talking to absolutely anyone. Um, and I loved that part. And so it is this really complex thing to say, and this is the nuance of it. And this is why we believe in long form content like a podcast over Instagram post, because it's just an ongoing conversation to have of like the complete duality and complexity of humans.
Yes. Yeah. Right. And to be able to acknowledge both pieces of it, I think are so important. I'm trying to think because you also mentioned it's interesting, and we've talked about this before. Both Emily's down their own business,
Yeah.
and so talked a lot about our work ethic and like why we pour ourselves into work and how it's just a value that both of us have. And you had mentioned in the past like feeling resentful for it because your dad might have been disengaged, and like same, my dad was working a ton.
Yeah.
And there, of course, was a piece of that where you're like, okay, well, where are you in our childhood? Um, but you can also model that too, right? Like
Yeah.
how you see also the benefit of that,
Yeah.
them working so hard and it being, and that's
And
also
working for
some,
themselves.
yes, and working for themselves.
Yeah.
That's also something that my brother has taken on too. Like
Mhm.
you see it modeled in the both of us.
What's so interesting is my husband's, both of his parents worked the same company, not necessarily the same job, but worked for the same company, doing pretty much very similar work from like 18 of retirement.
Wow.
Didn't switch jobs. Talk about fucking loyalty to a company. You don't get that anymore. Um, we're all quiet quitting and doing other things. Um, but so then when my husband decided just didn't to leave a job just because it simply didn't work for him, they were like, what the fuck? Where my parents were like, brought him flowers and champagne and were like, quit your job.
Yeah.
Because like it was just different, right? Like in his family, it was like, okay, you have a stable job. His town had less opportunities. Like it's just like this whole complex thing of like, okay, if you have a job and it pays you, you keep the job and that's it. Doesn't really matter if it makes you happy. Doesn't really matter if it feels fair to you. Doesn't really matter all that stuff because that just was like some stupid shit you didn't think about. Where my family was very much like, if something isn't working, we're to go create your own. Oh, my mom doesn't like the school she's working for, create a private practice. My dad doesn't work the bank he's working for, create a bank consulting firm, right? Like, and so it was just different values. And I think when we first got together, like my husband saw that as so frivolous of me.
Yeah.
I think he did. Like, I mean, I wish he was here right now to ask him, but I think he thought was sort of like, I can't believe this girl is so young starting a business. But I watched two people do it, and that was the privilege of it also being modeled to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it felt
And now
possible.
he's at a much better job that he's happy with way more freedom, and it worked, right?
You know what it also makes me think about? Love languages too. What's your love language?
We've talked about this for, I don't know. It's very much acts of service,
Yeah.
even though I tell myself that it's quality time. I like to lie to myself often.
Is there a reason why you like to pretend it's quality time?
Oh, because I feel like that's the most beautiful. I feel like that is like the one that I should want because that's like the nice one. But I'm more like,
Really?
yeah, I'm more like, oh, do the dishes for me.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Also, like,
What's
I think
yours?
I think words of affirmation
Oh yeah, you do love words of affirmation. That makes
too.
sense. Yeah.
They really keep me
Not
going.
mine. I'm like, don't talk to me. That one makes me uncomfortable.
But so my question was going to be like, how did you receive is did you get that from your family? Like, was acts of service the way that you showed each other that you cared about each other?
When my dad wasn't traveling and it was cold out, every day he would go out and start my car for me so it was warm before I drove to school.
That's so
Isn't that
nice.
so nice?
It is so nice.
Right?
So
And
yes.
yes, and my mom has done like, multiple masters and is very like my mom is like very much an academic, which I am not. Probably because of the learning disabilities and the ADHD. But my mom is super academic. So like my mom, when I would have like a big papers are very overwhelming to me. I'm such a great writer, but not an academic writer. And so that would be a very overwhelming experience. And my mom helped edit almost all of my papers in grad school.
Wow.
Hmm. So very much acts of service. That is really how they should love.
That is really lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get words of affirmation from your parents?
I'm thinking. I'm
I'm
like,
like,
did
oh,
I?
maybe not.
I think I, no, I think I did. I think I did. Yeah, and I think that's the way that they express how they care now is that they do the same thing that there's these words of affirmation of you're doing really well, proud of you. Um so yeah, absolutely, but it's just that is a perfect example of, how it is to things that we take from our family, the connection, the ways that we feel connected in our family, and to make them conscious because making them conscious allows you to communicate them, right? That's why anyone talks about um, your love language to begin with, is that you tend to approach your relationships with your own love language
Mhm.
and to understand what your partner's love language is or what your friend's love language is.
Yeah.
Right? Like now I know, Em, that I can do acts of service for you and you're going to
Well,
know that I love you.
you do. I feel like you do acts of service. That's why you run
It's
payroll.
just, it's all exactly. It's just embedded into, it's already embedded. That's why I love you because it is
Because you
embedded
run
into what we're doing.
it's not your own control issues.
No, definitely not. It's that I want you to know I love you. And
I will take that.
when you call me a beautiful angel starfish, I
I
feel
do.
amazing.
I give a lot of words. You know what's really funny is, right, is like I actually give a ton of words of affirmation. I just simply don't really care about getting them back.
I mean, I think
But
that's
I
why we
do
work.
them. But I do them a lot.
It's interesting.
Yeah, why do I do that all the time? I didn't really make the connection until now, but I really don't care. You know what I mean? When somebody comments me like,
Right. Like you're
tell
not,
myself that every day.
it's not like you're,
I already told
maybe
myself
that's,
that 3 times this morning. I'm so proud of you, Emmalee.
maybe that is why you're not needing it because you
I do
already
it.
feel connected to it. Like you
Yeah.
already are giving it to yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, the more conscious you can make this, the ways in which you feel,
You know
were
what
you gonna
acts of
say?
service you always give for me is
What? Tell me.
you always record the ads. Like by the time I even get to like recording the ads, you're like, I just did it. It's fine. Probably because you have that nice voice and everyone would rather hear you read the ads anyway
Yeah.
than me. But that is such a beautiful way you show love. And I don't think you do it on purpose. I think you're more like, whatever, I already have the mic out. I'll just record them all.
I also think about, I'm going to be with you. I think in my head, you have a child and I don't.
I sent Jen my list of shit that I had to do today because I was like, oh, I have to like move this around, this around. And so I sent Jen like my full to-do list. And she was like, oh my God.
Like
But
the
also right
ad,
now my husband's traveling, so it's just me.
exactly.
Oh
And so like
yeah.
I think to myself, always conscious of like what you're dealing with. And so I'm like,
Yeah.
this is not a big, if you asked me to give a presentation instead of you to like a bunch of people, I'd be
You
like,
would
no
not.
fucking way. You know?
But you just reading like the ads off in the mic
Isn't that
is
right?
that's easy.
Easy.
Well,
Easy
I
for
think
me to take over.
and I think that that's a really conscious thing to do, right? To sit here and be like, I can see what someone else is experiencing in this world. And I think that also but that's also like a larger thing of like how hard it is for people to ask for help. It's very hard for me to ask for help, and you are someone who is really good at being like, you know what, like putting together what's it
Just
called?
like no, just like
Putting the clues together, putting the dots together, putting
Context clues, reading context clues,
all those things.
emotional, reading context clues. I made that up. You can take it. Anyone who's listening, feel free to take that. Coined
I
it.
was taking
You don't think it was like so beautiful?
Oh yeah. Also, when I found out how much it takes to act, but you have to actually pay to trademark something, I'm like, everything belongs to everyone.
Take it. Just take it. It's yours now.
But I think that's something unique is it's really hard for most of us. All of us are like swept up on our own shit. That's human,
Yeah.
right? But you know, the other person who's really fucking good at this is my gym trainer. She is so good at clocking. I've never met somebody who knows everyone's name the way she does.
Wow.
She knows every person's name, and we'll have like 30 people in a class, and she will know every single person's name, and she will like clock you. Like she like today, like a workout, she was like, Emily, like I know that you can do the 30 pounds over the head compared to the 20 pounds. She's like calls me out immediately. And I watch her do it to everyone else too. That is a very special personality.
Yes. Well,
Right?
it requires you to be really attuned with another person.
Yes.
And I think the more time you spend with someone, the more you can attune to their needs.
Yeah.
I think that the more attuned you are to your own needs too, and the more you are giving to yourself, the more you're going to be able to attune to other people. Way harder for me to attune to other people's needs when I am feeling depleted.
Yeah.
And so I think attunement is a really important skill to have. That is another example. So like attunement can develop from a level of, you know, trauma in your relationships, right? Like where if you had an unpredictable parent where you had to attune to what was going on emotionally in your household, it might give you an extra ability to attune to other people around
Mm-hmm.
you. The skill that probably needs to be developed is how do you attune to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that attunement developed out of self-protection. And so that is a perfect example of like, this might have been something, right? Attunement, it may be developed out of maybe a chaotic predictability, but it's also something that can be really beneficial and helpful in your relationships as long as you're also attuning to yourself at the
Yeah.
same time.
Yeah. I don't know how we got
So,
from all of this to
well, I'll tell, well,
that's
I'll take it full
love
circle
it, baby.
in that, like, that's a perfect example of like, we always talk about the ways in which our childhood has affected us, maybe negatively, or the things that we have to grow from or work through. And that is an example of like, there's another side to the coin
Mm-hmm.
where both things can exist.
Oh yeah, I
Your
told you.
attunement. Go ahead.
Was that one time my therapist said to me, I don't know why you keep talking about being a people pleaser like it's the worst thing in the world. It clearly worked out pretty fucking well for you.
Exactly. That is another example, right? Where there's certain levels of people pleasing where you are not giving to yourself. You're just giving to other people where to please. But you also have an ability to attune to other people and recognize what their needs are
Mm-hmm.
and give to them to have a very mutually beneficial relationship as long as you can set boundaries too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I feel
Amazing.
like that in and of itself is another example of how there are two sides to every coin. So I would encourage you, if you're listening to this, if there are things, ways in which you've been affected by your childhood or growing up, is there another side to the coin? There doesn't have to be, right? I'm not saying look at the bright side of everything. There doesn't have to be a bright side, but I would just encourage, are there ways in which you grew up that maybe helped you
Mm.
socially, emotionally, relationally, career wise, just to think about that, allow yourself some time to process it. And then you get to make a decision. What are the things I want to hold on to? And then what are the things that I want to release?
Yeah. Well, thanks, mom and dad.
Thanks, mom and dad.
Thanks. Thanks, folks.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. Hey, we hope you enjoyed today's episode. Send it on over to a friend if you do. We always ask you to rate, review, subscribe, follow on Apple Podcasts. You can watch us on YouTube, follow us at the therapy group or at ShrinkChicks on Instagram. We are now in so many freaking states it will waste my time to say them all and waste your time too, for sure. And so it'd be better for you to just email us and we will try to get you in whatever state you're in, or at least we will hopefully give you a great other recommendation in your area. We're all over the place now. Still have openings in California as well, which is amazing. I know we had a wait list for a really long time. Now Cali's back opened. We have some very few spaces left in Rittenhouse, Philadelphia, and a little bit in Westchester, Pennsylvania. But we hope that you had a great episode. We hope you enjoyed this, and don't ever forget that to grow yourself. You got to know yourself. We'll see you next week.